The first time I met Karen, the lake shimmered like glass beneath a warm late afternoon sun. I was leaning against the railing of the dock with a mug of iced tea, savoring the breeze, when a sharp, purposeful voice cut through the quiet. "Excuse me. You must be the new resident." I turned to see a woman striding toward me with the confidence of someone used to giving orders. She wore a bright pink visor and a crisp white polo embroidered with the words Lakeside Haven HOA. And her smile looked more like a challenge than a welcome. Before I could even introduce myself, she began a well-rehearsed pitch. "I'm Karen, president of the Lakeside Haven Homeowners Association. It's time to get you registered. All residents around the lake are required to join our HOA. We meet every first Tuesday and dues are collected quarterly. Cash or check is fine." Her words tumbled out so quickly I barely had a chance to respond. "Actually," I said, "I'm just renting this cabin for the summer. My lease is with the property owner, not any association." Karen's smile stiffened, the edges of her mouth flattening. "Everyone joins," she replied, her tone cooling noticeably. "It's part of maintaining community standards. You'll need to sign the membership form and pay the initial fee by the end of the week." I kept my voice polite but firm. "I appreciate the information, but there's nothing in my lease about joining an HOA. I'm not a member." For a moment she simply stared, visor casting a sharp shadow across her eyes. Then she gave a tight nod, muttered something about misunderstandings, and walked off with brisk, clipped steps. As her figure disappeared up the path, a faint unease settled over me. Something told me Karen wasn't finished. 2 days later, I returned from a morning paddle on the lake to find a glossy trifold flyer taped to my cabin door. The headline in bold blue letters read asterisk, "Welcome to the Lakeside Haven HOA family." Asterisk as if my membership were a foregone conclusion. Inside was a cheerful list of benefits, like uniform shoreline aesthetics and community security patrols, followed by a stern notice about annual dues and penalties for noncompliance. At the bottom, in neat cursive, was Karen's signature and her phone number with the words "Call me today" underlined twice. I set the flyer on the kitchen counter, certain it was a misunderstanding, but the next morning brought another knock, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the quiet cabin. When I opened the door, there stood Karen, visor angled like a badge of authority. "Did you get our welcome packet?" she asked, skipping any greeting. "I can help you with the paperwork now if that's easier." I kept my voice calm. "Yes, I saw it. But as I said before, I'm renting here. The property owner hasn't mentioned any HOA obligations, and I'm not signing anything." Her expression hardened. "Renters are still responsible for dues. It's part of maintaining our standards. If you don't sign, you could face fines. We have the right to enforce them." "Actually," I replied evenly, "I checked my lease. It makes no mention of an HOA or mandatory fees. I'm not part of your association." Karen's eyes narrowed, and she inhaled sharply, as if to reload her argument. Instead she gave a tight smile. "I'll give you a few days to reconsider," she said, turning on her heel. As she strode up the gravel path, I noticed 2 neighbors peeking from their porches, their sympathetic looks suggesting they'd seen this play out before. Karen's persistence quickly shifted from mildly annoying to downright intrusive. Within a week she had started showing up at unpredictable times, clipboard in hand like a self-appointed inspector. I'd be sipping coffee on the porch when she'd suddenly appear at the edge of the dock, snapping photos of my Adirondack chairs or the small fire pit I'd set up by the water. Once, I caught her crouched near the side of the cabin, pointing her phone camera at my stacked firewood as though it were evidence of a crime. She didn't bother with pleasantries anymore. Instead, she shouted observations across the yard, complaints about my unauthorized lawn furniture or the angle of my kayak rack. Each time, I calmly reminded her that I was a tenant and not subject to her HOA's rules, but it only seemed to fuel her determination. To protect myself, I began documenting everything. I saved every flyer she left, recorded the dates and times of her visits, and even set up a motion-activated camera near the porch. Neighbors quietly offered knowing smiles when they passed by. One older couple paused during their evening walk to whisper, "She tried this with us too. Best to keep a record." The oddest moment came late one evening when I returned from a grocery run to find a yellow sticky note on my door. In block letters it read, "Final warning, join HOA or face fines." No signature, but I didn't need one. Rather than rattling me, the intimidation only sharpened my resolve. I double-checked my lease and even called the property manager to confirm, once again, that no homeowners association had any authority over me. Each new stunt from Karen made it clearer. She wasn't going to stop unless someone drew a firm line, and I was ready to be that someone. The humid evening air clung to my skin like a damp blanket when I heard a sharp knock at the door. 3 deliberate raps that carried an unmistakable sense of purpose. I opened it to find Karen standing there with 2 other people, both wearing matching HOA polos and tight, serious expressions. They looked like an improvised tribunal, complete with clipboards and an air of self-importance. Karen stepped forward first, her visor tilted like a badge. "This is your final notice," she declared, voice loud enough to carry across the quiet lake. "You must join the Lakeside Haven HOA and pay your dues immediately. Non-members are subject to penalties and potential legal action." Behind her, the 2 board members nodded in unison, their arms crossed as if rehearsed. I leaned casually against the doorframe, unwilling to give them the confrontation they seemed to crave. "As I've explained before," I said evenly, "I'm a tenant here. My lease includes no requirement to join your HOA. I've confirmed this with the property manager. You have no authority over me." Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. "You can't simply refuse. Everyone around this lake must comply. If you don't pay tonight, we'll escalate the matter to the county and involve law enforcement." Her companions shifted uneasily, but she pressed on, clearly expecting me to break under the pressure. Instead, I calmly repeated, "There's no legal basis for what you're demanding. I will not be joining." For a moment, only the soft chirp of crickets filled the silence. Then Karen's voice rose to a sharp pitch. "Fine," she snapped, pulling her phone from her pocket with a dramatic flourish. "If you won't cooperate, I have no choice but to call the authorities." I simply folded my arms and waited, the evening suddenly electric with the promise of an inevitable showdown. The sky had shifted to deep violet when the flashing blue lights finally appeared at the end of the gravel drive. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped out of their cruiser, their expressions a mix of curiosity and mild annoyance, as if they already suspected the call wasn't the emergency they'd been promised. Karen waved her arms like she was guiding an airplane to land. "Officers, over here," she called, her voice carrying across the quiet lake. "This tenant is refusing to join our homeowners association and is breaking multiple community rules." The taller deputy raised an eyebrow, glancing from Karen to me as I stood calmly on the porch. "Ma'am," he said patiently, "refusing to join an HOA isn't a criminal matter. What exactly is the emergency?" Karen launched into a breathless explanation about dues, regulations, and maintaining property values, her words tumbling out faster than the mosquitoes buzzing around us. I waited until she ran out of steam before stepping forward with my lease in hand. "Good evening, officers," I said, offering a polite nod. "I rent this cabin. There's nothing in my lease requiring HOA membership. I've spoken with the property manager to confirm that. I'm happy to show you the paperwork." The shorter deputy took the documents and skimmed them quickly. "Looks pretty straightforward," he said, handing them back. "This is a civil matter at best, not something for law enforcement." Karen's face tightened, but she tried one last protest. "But he's refusing to follow our rules." "Ma'am," the taller deputy replied evenly, "your association doesn't have jurisdiction over a non-member tenant. Please don't call us for something like this again." They exchanged a polite nod with me, then headed back to their car. Karen stood frozen, phone clutched in her hand, as the patrol car's lights faded into the night, leaving behind only the sound of crickets and her stunned silence. The deputies had barely pulled away when my phone buzzed with a message from the property manager. *Owner has signed the updated management agreement. You're officially acting landlord until their return. I stared at the screen for a moment, a slow grin spreading across my face. The timing couldn't have been better. Not only was I a tenant, I now held full management authority for the property, including oversight of maintenance, rent collection, and any communication with residents on the owner's behalf. I quickly called the manager to confirm, and she explained that the owners were traveling overseas for several months. "If anything needs attention, you're the point of contact," she said. "We trust your judgment." She even emailed the notarized documents within minutes, complete with signatures and a state seal. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen, who had spent weeks trying to strong-arm me into her association, was in fact renting her own lakeside home from the very people who had just given me authority to manage the property. I flipped through the lease agreement and there it was. Her name printed neatly, along with the cabin's address 2 doors down. I printed copies of the updated management paperwork and placed them in a folder. Part of me relished the quiet power shift. Another part simply felt relief knowing I had concrete proof of my new role if Karen tried another stunt. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sunset stain the water in streaks of orange and pink. The lake was serene, but I could feel a different kind of storm brewing. Karen had escalated at every turn, and I doubted a single visit from the sheriff would stop her. The next encounter, though, would be on entirely different terms, and I was more than ready. The following afternoon I was sitting on the cabin's porch swing with a book when I heard quick, purposeful footsteps crunching up the gravel path. Karen stormed into view, visor pulled low like a helmet, her expression a mix of outrage and panic. She didn't bother with a greeting. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to scatter a pair of ducks on the shoreline. "Calling the cops on me, embarrassing me in front of the neighbors. Do you know who I am?" I closed the book slowly and set it aside. "I didn't call anyone, Karen. You did. And the deputies made it clear there's nothing to enforce." Her cheeks flushed crimson. "Don't play innocent. You're undermining this entire community. Without dues, without oversight, this lake will fall apart." She took a step closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "But it won't matter. I'll have you out of here soon enough." I resisted the urge to laugh, instead pulling out the envelope I'd been waiting to show her. "Actually, you might want to read this," I said, handing her a copy of the updated management agreement from the property owner. Her eyes darted across the page, confusion giving way to shock as she reached the section granting me temporary landlord authority, including oversight of the very home she rented 2 doors down. This can't be right," she stammered. "It's signed and notarized," I said evenly. "Effective immediately, any concerns about the property you occupy will go through me." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish struggling for air. For once, she had no quick retort, only a strangled sound of disbelief. She spun on her heel and marched away without another word, leaving the path scattered with the force of her retreat and a silence that felt like victory. The days that followed felt startlingly calm, as though a heavy curtain of tension had finally lifted from the lake. Mornings were quiet again, just the hum of dragonflies and the rhythmic lap of water against the dock. Without Karen's constant flyers, knocks and late-night intrusions, the cabin seemed to breathe easier, and so did I. Word of her retreat traveled quickly. Neighbors who had once watched from behind curtains now strolled by with relaxed smiles, stopping to chat about fishing conditions or to share a slice of homemade pie. Several admitted they'd been quietly rooting for someone to stand up to her for years. One older couple even brought over a bottle of wine as a small thank you for restoring sanity. Meanwhile, Karen kept an unusually low profile. Her usual patrols ceased, and the once-weekly HOA reminder emails dried up. I heard from the property manager that she'd avoided board meetings altogether, citing personal matters. No one seemed eager to fill the void her absence created, and the community didn't crumble without her oversight. It flourished. Families decorated their docks with colorful lanterns, kids built sand castles on the beach, and spontaneous evening bonfires replaced the stiffly scheduled HOA events. One crisp evening we held a casual potluck on the shore. Laughter echoed across the water as neighbors swapped stories and toasted marshmallows beneath string lights. Standing there with a plate of pie in hand, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange twist of events. What began as an aggressive attempt to control me had ended with a neighborhood more connected and carefree than ever. As the sun dipped below the trees and the lake mirrored the glowing sky, I realized Karen's power had never been real. It was fear and bluster. Now that it was gone, peace wasn't just restored, it felt permanent.